which actually leads nicely into my second point in relation to suburb selection. So Woodridge selection was purely based on yield, and as expected, I'm not seeing much of a capital growth. So 3 years ago when I bought this Woodridge property, it was around the high twos, 295, and today you can still get a high set just around the high, even the high twos, or some of them in the early 300s. So there's literally been no capital growth, and that is fine. But I guess the point here is, someone who's starting out, or as an experienced investor who's trying to acquire more residential properties, if I want to do it again, I would probably choose more of a suburb that actually has a balance of yield and growth. So rather than heavily geared at the yield, in this case, the Woodridge property selection criteria was very, very heavily geared to yield. And the reason that I say that is because during the purchase, I purely look at the numbers, the on paper number that is going to return to me. And, after acquiring it, obviously I had issues of vacancies, I had the issues of tenant turnovers, and plus on top of that, maintenance issues. So these three things really killed the so-called good-looking cash flow on paper. And at best, it's probably a neutral after tax. But having no capital growth on top of that just means essentially it is very difficult to be able to get any return or any actual return on this property. That's why factoring in that cash flow side of things is neutral. Basically, it covers itself, but there is no capital growth. Then 3 years down the track, I look at it in terms of its performance, and I say, well, if I actually put this money in terms of this property into another property that's in a better suburb of Logan, sacrificing a bit of yield but maintaining a bit of balance with capital growth, then would that be producing a different outcome today? So it's actually the opportunity cost that's being lost here. So that's why, when I look back into the Woodridge property, it's probably not the most stellar performance out of the whole portfolio. And I have to admit that if I would to do it again, I probably wouldn't have chosen this property. But look, what's done is already done, and I'm hoping to be able to share this today so that anyone who is going to be looking at just purely a cash flow, a yield play, need to be mindful of that. Anything on paper looks good. And with such a cheap purchase price, there's always going to be caveats and downsides, and you just need to understand what you're buying into and what the area is like. And then the last thing is be mindful about the area that you're investing in. What's the owner occupier versus the investor mix? Because in this case, Woodridge is a suburb that has got a lot of investor interest. So as you could also imagine, there's only a limited number of tenants that's looking to rent in Woodridge. But at the same time, when the supply of those properties has got a lot more than the demand, then that's where the rent starts to go down. So my property has just gone through a period of vacancy as well, and I was struggling to get it rented out. When I do a search, there's been about 40 or 50 similar properties available for rent on the market. So as you can imagine, there's two ways to go about it. One is you keep dropping rent, or one, you're just going to have to put more money into getting the property up to another level in order to attract a tenant in there. Thankfully, it's now rented, but I had to actually discount the rent again. So, if you think of it that way, the rent has to keep dropping, which means, you're going to have to pay more on your holding costs in order to keep the property going. And in a suburb that unfortunately is a lot investor driven, which means, people look at numbers, and in that instance, the capital growth aspect of it is not stellar. So coupling all these facts, I don't think Woodridge property has been my best performance, unfortunately. And if I have to choose one to sell out of my whole portfolio, this is probably the first one that I will get rid of. just because of the fact that, you know, it's in the Woodridge, the tenant has a lot of issues, the location is not stellar, it's not near any kind of transport, not within walking distance anyway, not near any kind of transport, and there's simply way too much competition. So hopefully this gives everyone some idea in terms of the suburb selection, the type of due diligence that you need to look into, and also just keeping in mind that, you know, pick a property that's got good fundamentals, that's close to public transport. Don't pick the cheapest property. You know, find a balance that's going to be able to give you a relatively decent yield. So not about 7% type of stuff, but at the same time can also give you some compounding capital growth over the years. And if you hold it for long term, it will still be a winner. But if you do have one of these properties, that's also okay. As long as you can actually get it rented out, and, you know, with the record low interest rate at the moment, I don't think it will be difficult to hold. So it's a blessing in disguise that the interest rate continues to go down. But just from the return on investment perspective, you know, this is not the most stellar property. And if I had the opportunity again, I wouldn't look at getting one of these. So there you go. There is our 3-year annual review of the Woodridge property. A lot of lessons to be learned on this property, and I hope that I managed to give everyone some idea about what sort of property you should be avoiding buying, especially for first-time investors, because this is just not the type of property that you want to get in your initial acquisition. You want to be able to focus on the capital growth type of properties initially, so that you can take the equity out in the shortest period of time as much as you can, and then be able to buy your next one, second one, third one, and so on. So, you know, for the cash flow type of properties, it definitely has its place, but just be mindful. You know, make sure that you do all your due diligence. If it's such a low social demographic areas, it's probably not worth it, all the headache, even though on paper it looks fantastic and so attractive. But, you know, you just got to be you either have to be factoring in the extra vacancies, the turnovers, the maintenance issues. That's all going to be adding up little bit by little bit, okay? And not to mention, if it's an investor heavy suburb, then you're going to have a lot of competitions in terms of renting it out every time when there is vacancy. So in summary, that is all about the Woodridge property that I have to say today. I hope you guys enjoy it. As always, if you got any questions, feel free to comment below. Otherwise, I'll see you guys again in next Invest Power episode.